There are moments in time when history does not whisper, it thunders. When walls tremble not from iron or fire, but from something unseen, eternal, and immeasurable. Welcome to the Bible Weaver, where ancient voices rise again, and the dust of forgotten ages still carries the echo of heaven. If stories of faith and fire stir something deep within you, walk with us through the ages. Let these battles breathe once more. Now listen, this is not legend. This is the sound of faith at war. The night was vast and patient. Across the wilderness, thousands of tents shivered beneath the wind that came down from the mountains east of the Jordan. The fires of Israel smoldered low, the embers pulsing like watchful eyes across the dark plain. Beyond them, in the far distance, a wall gleamed in the moonlight, pale, unyielding, ancient. Jericho, the first gate into the land promised to Abraham, the city whose name meant the moon, and whose pride reached just as high. For 40 years the children of the desert had wandered. They were born beneath open skies, weaned on dust and manna, hardened by exile, tempered by the long silence of God. Their fathers had fallen in rebellion and unbelief. Their bones lay scattered across dunes that no map remembered. But this generation carried no memory of Egypt's chains, only a promise that the God who split seas and fed them from heaven would give them a home. Now they stood upon the threshold of that promise, and the first thing they saw was stone. Stone higher than courage, thicker than hope, forged by men who trusted only their walls. Inside those walls, the people of Jericho slept uneasily. They had heard of the Jordan dividing, of the Amorite kings who vanished in a single afternoon, of the pillar of cloud that moved like a living thing before this nomad nation. They had locked their gates, no one went out, no one came in. The city waited, and fear was its watchman. Joshua, son of Nun, could not sleep. He walked alone beyond the tents, his cloak gathering dust around his feet. The night was heavy with the breath of waiting men, soldiers who pretended to dream, women whispering prayers into the wind, the low murmur of cattle restless before dawn. He had seen miracles with his own eyes, the Red Sea dividing, manna falling like dew, yet the burden of command felt heavier than stone. Moses was gone. The voice that once spoke face to face with God had fallen silent. Now the task was his, and the enemy wore a crown of walls. As he neared the edge of the camp, something caught the air, a vibration like the moment before thunder. Out of the dark stood a man, his sword drawn, its edge burning with a light that was not of fire. Joshua's hand went to his own blade. "Are you for us or for our enemies?" he asked. The answer came like a wind across stone. "Neither, but as commander of the Lord's army, I have now come." The desert held its breath. Joshua fell face down, the sand cold against his skin. The voice spoke again, calm yet vast. "Remove your sandals, for the place where you stand is holy." And when Joshua rose, the stars themselves seemed to bow in silence. Heaven had entered the field, and war, as men knew it, was about to change forever. At dawn the command came, not in shouts, but in stillness. "You shall march around the city, all of you, once a day for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets before the Ark of the Covenant. On the 7th day you shall march 7 times. And when the trumpets sound, the people shall shout. Then the walls shall fall down flat. No siege engines, no battering rams, no arrows, only obedience. and the silence between footsteps. Among the captains, there was a murmur that rolled like a low tide. These were men who had fought in the wilderness, soldiers who bled under Amalek's spears, who buried comrades beneath shifting dunes. Now they were told to conquer a fortress by walking. Some clenched their fists in disbelief. Others, remembering the sea that once stood upright, simply bowed their heads. If heaven gave the order, perhaps heaven would strike the blow. The ark moved first. Gold caught the newborn sun, scattering it across the plain like shards of dawn. Behind it marched the priests with their ram's horns. Behind them came the warriors, and behind the warriors, the multitude, tribes, children, old men leaning on staffs polished by years of exile. From the walls of Jericho came the distant laughter of soldiers. To them it looked like madness, a procession of pilgrims where there should have been an army. The horns gave a single note, long, low, haunting. It hung in the air like the memory of thunder. Then the people began to walk. One circuit. No words, no arrows loosed. The priests blew again. The sound bent the wind, crawled over the stones, slid down the walls. Inside, mothers pulled children from windows. Dogs howled. The gate guards gripped their spears but did not move. By sunset, the line of marchers had returned to camp. No wall had cracked, no sign had come. Only silence, heavier than any siege. Day 2, the same. Day 3, the dust hung thicker. The sun bit harder. Doubt crept like smoke through the ranks. Still they marched. And in that repetition, something shifted. Faith ceased to be a word and became a rhythm, a pulse that beat in time with their footsteps. By the 6th day, even the children walked without question, their eyes fixed on the walls that refused to crumble. Inside Jericho, fear had turned to madness. The king demanded sacrifices to Baal and Ashtoreth. Priests poured wine on altars until it ran like blood. The people heard the trumpets each morning and counted the days. Whispers spread. The God of Israel waits for something. They did not know how right they were. On the 7th day, Joshua rose before dawn. The camp was still. Only the soft crack of leather straps, the shuffle of feet, the breath of men who knew they were standing on the edge of eternity. He spoke only once. Today, the Lord will deliver the city into your hands. And so they marched, not once, but 7 times. By the 3rd circuit, the priests' faces glistened with sweat. By the 5th, their arms trembled beneath the weight of the trumpets. By the 6th, the people moved as one breath. At the 7th, the horns rose. The sound that followed was not mere music. It was a cry older than language, a note carved from the first breath of creation. And the people shouted. The earth answered. The walls shook as if from within, their stones grinding against each other like teeth in a dream. A roar filled the sky, not of men, but of heaven descending. Then the walls fell, not slowly, not in parts, all at once, as if the breath of God had exhaled through them. Dust rose like smoke from a sacrifice. Jericho was no more. The roar faded, leaving a silence so wide it felt alive. For a heartbeat, the whole plain seemed to stand still. Wind, dust, men, even time itself. Then the echo came rolling back from the hills, long and low, like thunder remembering where it had been born. Stones the size of oxen lay scattered, half buried in the sand. The great towers of Jericho leaned, sighed, and slid into ruin. Joshua did not move. The weight of the miracle pressed against his chest. He could taste dust and holiness in the air, the strange mixture of war and worship. All around him, men fell to their knees, some in fear, some in awe, some because their legs would hold them no longer, for they had seen with their own eyes what their fathers had only heard, the voice of God, written in collapse and stone. "Forward," Joshua said quietly. The word carried farther than a shout. The priests lifted the ark. The warriors surged through the smoke where the gate had been. There was no gate now, only daylight. Inside the city, chaos screamed. The proud walls that had promised safety became tombs for those who trusted them. Roofs caved. Dust rolled like storm clouds through the streets. Amid the ruin, the cry of a single ram's horn still lingered, long and mournful, like a requiem for the age of idols. Among the trembling ruins stood a single house. Its windows bore a mark, a cord of scarlet, bright as blood against the ash. And within it, Rahab waited. She had heard the promise that the spies she hid would spare her household when destruction came. Around her, the city fell, yet the cord held. Light poured through the cracks, harsh and golden. She whispered a prayer neither Canaanite nor Hebrew, only human. Gratitude and terror woven together. Joshua's captains found her there. "Bring them out," he commanded. And the woman stepped into the open, carrying her father's hand, her mother's arm, her brother's fear. Behind her, the ruin smoked. Before her, the wilderness stretched wide and strange. Mercy had found its mark. By noon, Jericho burned. Flames climbed the timbers and curled around broken idols. The air smelled of cedar and iron. The gold and silver were taken for the Lord's treasury. Everything else was given to the fire. The priests stood in a circle around the ark, their faces streaked with sweat and ash, their voices hoarse from the trumpet's cry. They sang, not in triumph, but in awe. Because victory, when it belongs to heaven, is never loud. It is holy. Joshua watched the smoke twist into the sky and thought of Moses, of a staff raised over the Red Sea, of plagues and promises, of a people born in wilderness and now baptized by a battle. He felt neither joy nor sorrow, only the gravity of completion. One wall had fallen, 100 more awaited beyond the horizon. But Jericho was the beginning, the proof that faith could move not just hearts, but the very architecture of the world. At sunset, he gathered the tribes. The light bled crimson over the plain, and the air trembled with the heat of dying fires. "See what the Lord has done," he said. "These stones once mocked heaven, now they witness it. No man shall rebuild this city. Let it lie as a memory of power misplaced." The people bowed, and the wind carried their silence away like smoke. That night the camp lay among the ruins. Men slept beside shattered gates. Women hummed lullabies between sobs of disbelief. From the ark came a faint golden glow, pulsing like the heartbeat of the earth. Somewhere within the darkness, Rahab dreamed of a new land, and Joshua dreamed of more battles. Each one harder to believe, each one demanding more than courage. When the dawn came, it was quiet again. The vultures circled high, black wings against the pale sky. Children woke and asked where the walls had gone, and their mothers pointed to the piles of stone and said, "There." But the old men shook their heads. The walls were gone because faith had taken their place. The sun climbed slow over the ashes of Jericho. Its light crawled across broken ramparts and hollow streets, glinting on bits of bronze and the blackened ribs of burned gates. Smoke no longer rose, it drifted, thin, weary, resigned to the wind. The smell of cedar and death lingered in every breath. Joshua walked alone through what remained. Each step cracked the crust of dust. The that already tried to bury the memory. Here a child's toy half melted by fire. There a shattered idol whose face had been smooth from centuries of prayer. Around him lay the ruin of man's certainty, and in that ruin, a strange peace. He paused beside the place where the gate had once stood. His hand touched the fallen beam. It was still warm. He closed his eyes. "Not by might," he whispered, "nor by power, but by your spirit." The words drifted upward, joining the cinders that spiraled into the sky. Behind him came the sound of sandals over gravel. The priests, the elders, the weary captains, they said nothing. Words had fled before the sight of what faith had done. Joshua turned to them. "Gather 12 stones," he said, "one for each tribe. We will build an altar where the walls once stood, that our children may ask, 'What do the stones mean?' And we will tell them, 'They are the memory of obedience.'" So they worked until the sweat of battle became the sweat of worship. Each stone was lifted with reverence, not haste. The altar rose, simple and rough, a spine of rock pointing heavenward amid the ruin. When it was done, the priests brought fire from the camp, kindled it upon the stones, and the smoke climbed straight into the windless morning. Then Joshua read from the book of the law. His voice, deep and raw, rolled across the valley. Blessings for those who would remember, curses for those who would forget. The people answered, "Amen," not as echo, but as covenant. In that moment, Israel was no longer a wandering tribe. It was a nation carved by faith and sealed by flame. At the edge of the plain, Rahab watched. The scarlet cord still hung from her hand like a thread of destiny. She stood among the strangers who had become her kin. When Joshua saw her, he beckoned. "You and yours shall dwell in the midst of Israel," he said, "for you believed when others feared." Rahab bowed low, but her eyes held wonder more than humility. In a single night, she had crossed from ruin to promise. Behind her, the city of her birth smoldered. Before her stretched the unknown mercy of God. The priests extinguished the altar fire when the sun reached its height. They covered the ashes with dust and set the ark once more upon their shoulders. The trumpets did not sound. There was no need. The sound of falling walls still lingered in every ear. Slowly, the camp began to move northward, a river of humanity flowing toward new battles, new cities, new tests of faith. That evening, the sky turned the color of bronze. The people camped beside a stream, their tents glowing with firelight. Children laughed again. The older warriors sat silent, sharpening blades that might never be used. Across the water, Joshua knelt alone, the scroll of the law open before him. The words glimmered in the dying light. "Be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." He thought of the walls, of the impossible sound that had broken them. He wondered if faith would always demand the same silence, the same surrender. Somewhere in the distance, a trumpet called, not of war, but of evening prayer, and the sound carried over the valley like the sigh of a giant at rest. That night, the dream came. He was standing again before the fallen walls, but they were whole, shining like mirrors. From within them came voices, millions of them, singing in a language older than light. The song rose and fell like the sea, and in it he heard the names of all who would one day fight battles, not of swords, but of spirit. The song became wind, the wind became breath, and the breath whispered, "Remember." Joshua woke with tears on his face. At dawn he gathered the leaders. "The Lord has given us the land," he said, "but each victory will be born of obedience. Do not think that faith is a weapon to wield. It is a fire to carry, and it burns first in the one who bears it." They listened, and in their silence was agreement deeper than speech. As the procession broke camp, the priests raised the ark. Its gold caught the first light of morning, and the reflection ran like fire through the ranks. The people followed it as they had followed the cloud and the pillar of flame, proof that God walked with them even when unseen. The path ahead wound between hills pale as bone, and in the distance, the land of Ai waited, a name that meant heap of ruins. But for Israel, ruin was no longer defeat. It was the raw material of miracles. Behind them, Jericho lay still. Vines would someday creep across its stones. Travelers would build fires upon its dust, unaware that their feet stood where heaven once shouted. The city was gone, yet its lesson endured, that the walls which protect can also imprison, and that faith is not a shout against stone, but a surrender to the voice that commands it to fall. And so the story moves onward, through fire and wilderness, through kings and prophets, through the long night of doubt to the dawn of promise. The walls of Jericho fell once, but in every age, new walls rise, and still faith walks around them, silent, patient, unyielding, until the sound of heaven is heard again. This is the Bible Weaver, where ancient voices rise again, where silence becomes song, and where every story ends the same way, with the sound of heaven still moving through the dust. The land beyond Jericho was quiet. Hills rolled outward like sleeping lions, and the wind carried no scent of war, only the faint sweetness of new grass. Israel moved through that silence with the careful steps of men who had seen too much. Each face bore the same question. If the walls could fall so easily, what else might the voice of heaven demand of them? Days became weeks. The ruins of Jericho shrank behind them until they were nothing but a shimmer in the heat. Yet the memory followed. Children spoke of it in their play. Soldiers told it to the night watch. Mothers whispered it over their cooking fires. The walls listened, and they fell. The story became the heartbeat of a nation still learning to breathe faith instead of fear. At dusk one evening, Joshua climbed a ridge overlooking the camp. Below him, thousands of small fires burned, each one a small sun against the dark. The sound of flutes drifted upward, thin and plaintive. He remembered Egypt, the hunger of the desert, Moses standing upon Sinai with a face that glowed like lightning. Now the burden of promise rested on him, and he wondered if any man could ever truly carry what belonged to God. Behind him, footsteps approached. It was Caleb, his oldest friend. Broad-shouldered, scarred, eyes still sharp as steel. "You should rest," Caleb said. Joshua smiled faintly. "Rest comes to those who stop marching." Caleb looked toward the horizon. "And do you think heaven ever stops?" Joshua said nothing. The two men stood in silence, watching stars rise over the valley like sparks from an unseen forge. When dawn came, Joshua called the people again. He spoke not of victory, but of remembrance. "Build your lives as you built the altar, stone upon stone of obedience. Let Jericho remind you that no wall is eternal except the one within your heart. Tear that one down, and all others will follow." The crowd murmured assent. They understood, though dimly, that the true battle had never been for land or glory. It was for faith itself. That night the camp slept in peace. The ark rested beneath its covering of linen. The The priests kept silent watch. Somewhere, a mother sang her child to sleep, a lullaby made from fragments of the trumpet's old refrain. The melody drifted over the plain, soft as prayer. Joshua lay awake, staring at the sky. He counted the constellations Moses once named and felt the same ancient awe. He whispered, "Lord, teach us to walk until your silence becomes song." And in that moment, the wind shifted. The flap of his tent stirred. A low whisper passed through the camp, touching every sleeper like a hand. No one woke, yet every heart heard, "I am with you." In later generations, wanderers would come to that place. They would see only hills and stones, not knowing that beneath their feet slept the bones of Jericho. Shepherds would graze flocks where armies once stood. Children would chase each other over the buried streets. And sometimes when the wind blew from the east, they would swear they heard a sound, faint, distant, like trumpets carried on the breath of time. Walls fall, faith stands. That is the law written not in stone, but in soul. If this story spoke to you, let it live again. Share it, so that the echo may travel farther, until faith finds another wall to bring down. You are part of the tapestry now. This is the Bible weaver, where ancient voices rise again, where silence becomes song, and where every story ends the same way, with the sound of heaven still moving through the dust.